Hey everyone, this is Lori Silverman with episode 4 of Level Up with Lori. Today I am thrilled to have as my guest Jeff Crane. Jeff and I first met when we were seated across from each other the night before the start of the conference, PMO London in the UK. We were having dinner with our host, and Jeff and I were both lucky enough to be on the main stage at the conference at that time. So Jeff, thank you so much for coming and joining us today on Level Up with Lori. For those of you who are joining us, please let us know that you're around, that that you are with us, and where you're from. I'm not seeing the notification yet, so there may be a bit of a delay here in terms of, there we go. So now I can see who's joining us. And let me give you a little bit of background on Jeff. He has a company called Adaptimist Insights, but he also teaches full-time in the Emotion and Health Research Lab at Trent University. And I think you teach full-time in a program called Applied Modeling and Quantitative Methods, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're here with me today. I love the title that you selected for this, which is like, why smart people fail. I'm like, well, isn't everybody like who's attached to us on LinkedIn like really smart? So that means that all of us have the opportunity to fail. I mean, in some cases that is probably true. But and we have with us today, we have John Alexson, who I know from Madison, Wisconsin, has joined us, and Renee Michelle Farrow from Pittsburgh, first time, who's with us as well. Thank you for joining us. Jeff, there are a couple different things I want to talk to you about today. And just for our audience members, if you don't know Jeff, I encourage you to connect to him on LinkedIn. He has written a series of articles that are absolutely profound. And when I started to see this series come out in 2019, I immediately wrote to him and said, there is so much application of the work that you're doing to the industry where people are doing data analytics, data science, business analysts, business leaders, and so on. So maybe what you can help us with today is you've been doing some really interesting work in the area of emotional intelligence. Kind of like take us backwards, like to what got you started in that and the sorts of things that you're doing today.
So, okay, I mean, there's a can of worms in that question, right? My background, I was not originally a faculty at a university, right? So once upon a time, for 20 years, I was a project manager in industry. I worked for investment banks, insurance companies. And so I was sort of based all over. For about 10 years, I was based off and on in the Far East. And it was this incredibly formative time, right? So like I had no skills in terms of running a project. Basically, I came out of high school with my personal hero being Matthew Broderick, right? Like, and I don't mean like Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick. I mean like the Ali Sheedy is in my bedroom and I'm going to show her my computer from War Games at Matthew Broderick. Like that was me. And so I came out and I have some computer skills because that was kind of what I grew up on. And in the 80s, that meant you basically had a job, right? So I went out, I started working, and immediately within, I'd say, a couple of years of sort of being a support analyst for the equities desk I was working for, Jeff, we love you. We want to promote you. We're going to give you some projects to manage. And now all of a sudden, all these skills that I was applying that were of a technical nature were completely irrelevant in terms of me being able to perform my job as a PM, right? So it was a very challenging time for a long while. And what I realized was that, okay, there are a bunch of things that I am not doing that I need to really learn. And all of these had to do with understanding people, understanding my own feelings, coping with challenging emotions, dealing with stress, and not getting freaked out anytime something new happened that I wasn't prepared to deal with. Anyway, so that was kind of my life up until about 2009. I moved home from Asia, and pretty much the worst possible time during the global financial crisis, and that was just kind of the end of it. So I thought, what am I going to do? These soft skills, these were the things that I was really struggling with, and I thought, well, I can go back to school and I can learn more about them. I mean, I got some money left over, may as well try it. Got an undergraduate degree in psychology, and from there a master's in modeling, statistical modeling, not like
very cool.
And then from there, we're seeing where things go. But when I landed at the university, it was probably about year 3, I hooked up with the Emotion and Health Research Lab. And from there, everything kind of took off. So that's kind of where I got started. The work around emotional intelligence, well, that's what we do in the lab. That's our core area of focus. So we look at human emotion from all kinds of different perspectives.
Before you go into that, can I just welcome a few more people? Would that be okay with you?
Please do.
Okay, yes. So for those of you who are watching us on LinkedIn, and this show will be archived as well on YouTube, I wanted to welcome Sejal from LA. We have someone, Arthur from the Netherlands, Maggie from England. We have Bertha from Toronto, which is where you are right now, based, right? That's your home. Wouldn't you know it, Lindsay Scott has joined us as well. Hey! Hey, Lindsay, nice to have you with us. And Engelbert from Santiago, Chile has joined us. So we have a really wonderful worldwide audience for us today. But I'm sorry to interrupt you on that, but go on in terms of the unique sorts of work that you're doing in the lab on emotional intelligence.
Yeah, no worries. So our focus on EI is really twofold. We want to expand the models that we use, and we also want to sort of do some knowledge mobilization, getting people aware of these emotional and social competencies that are so critical to everybody's ability to perform within the capacity of their employment. It's also important to note that, from one job to another, there's different emotional competencies that are required, right? So like a funeral director with a sense of humor might be a bit of a mismatch, but that sense of humor might be really important for a salesperson. So, the kinds of skills that we use change from job to job to job.
Sure. So you've been challenging, right, some of the traditional is it what I call it folklore beliefs around emotional intelligence, right? Am I right to say it that way, or
Sure, yeah.
would you codify it a different way?
There are a lot of different myths about what emotional intelligence is, and this kind of happens anytime you have a new idea that kind of gets out into the world. Well, people pick that idea up, and different aspects of that idea will resonate with them. The problem is their interpretation might not be exact, but then they start publishing stuff saying that this is the correct thing. So emotional intelligence first came on the scene in 1990 with a paper by Sally and Mayer from Yale University. And I won't go into all the details because it can go really boring really fast. And the idea was that EI was really, like, if I were to capture what emotional intelligence is, it's the ability to use and recognize and use emotional information in ways that benefit you and allow you to sort of make good decisions.
Okay.
Right? So I recognize emotional information, I can see it, I can interpret it, and I can use it to make decisions. That's ultimately the whole point of why we have this, right? So, I mean, I might say to somebody, sorry, but I don't have time for your personal nervous breakdown right now.
Right.
That might be something that I need to do in that particular moment. But if I haven't thought through, there are going to be consequences for me having said that to that person. And have I thought through those consequences? Do I know where that could go? Do I know what ultimately could wind up happening because of my, choosing to behave in that manner? And this is one of the things that when we hear people talk about emotional intelligence, they say, oh, well, it's about being nice. Right? Emotional intelligence is about being nice. And I don't have time to be nice all the time. But the thing is, that's not what it's about.
Right.
Some people say that emotional intelligence is about giving free rein to feelings, right? You break out the finger symbols and we all have a great big group cry. Like, that's not what emotional intelligence is about. It always comes back to making decisions based on emotional information that are beneficial to me and beneficial to the people around me.
Okay, so let's stay with that for just a second. Because there might be some people who are listening to you and I who are not aware of why it is absolutely profoundly critical that emotions be a part of the decision-making process. Now, I'm familiar with the work done by Antonio Damasio, who really was like one of the first people, he's a physician, right, who said to us that he started seeing patients who had the emotional part of their brain damaged, but yet everything else about them was fine. And when he gave them a decision to make, they couldn't make it. All they did was they looped, is what I would call it, right? They talked about options or pros and cons or consequences, but they couldn't actually get sparked to make the decision itself. So is that the reason that emotions and emotional intelligence and the attachment to it, or is there something else in addition to that that makes it critical?
So it's all kind of tied together, right? We are physical beings, and we have this thing that we tend to do is where we separate our bodies and our minds. So there's this thing that carries me around, and it does what it does, but mostly I live up here in this little space. This is all me. And of course, that's not true, right? All of it is one connected, contiguous system. When we talk about emotions, we are talking about things that are somatic. And what that means is that they occur within the body. Right. And I think we can all recognize that. Like whenever you're scared, when you go out to give a presentation, if you don't do them very often, you step out on stage, and where do you feel something? You feel it in the pit of your stomach. What that is, so you interpret that as the emotion of anxiety, but what it actually is blood withdrawing from the intestines to sort of prepare you for fight or flight. Right? So that's what's going on. Now, I think you were talking about some of the articles that I wrote last year, and one of the big areas that interests me is something called alexithymia.
Okay.
Alexithymia is a condition, it's a subclinical condition that really has to do with the inability to identify and describe feelings. So if I walk out on stage, if I'm alexithymic and I walk out on stage and I feel there's something going on in my stomach, I might not be able to associate that with the emotion of anxiety. So maybe I think I'm hungry. Maybe I think, oh, well, this is a stomach thing, so maybe I just need a sandwich and that'll make it better. Right. Alexithymia, because I can't make that association, I can't associate this physical feeling with an emotion, I'm not going to be able to describe that emotion because I have no vocabulary with which to talk about it. Right. But that's going to lead to something that we see. Since I have no ability to describe the things that are going on inside me, I stop even trying. And everything about my world and how I interpret things in it is external, right? So, and we all know people like this. So there'll be people who tend to blame everybody else for things that are around them, right?
Yep.
Right. Well, why is that? Is it that they genuinely believe that other people are the cause of their problems? Well, no, it's just they don't have an ability to really look inward and reflect because they haven't spent any time doing that where the feelings are concerned.
So let's stop right there for a second. And I want to welcome another person. Joanna is with us from Spain. And by the way, for those of you who are watching us, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to make comments. I look for those. You see me looking off to my right all the time. So I'm looking for those sorts of interactions with you. Where does this come from? So most people don't realize I'm a therapist by background. So this really intrigues me because I think that if this is a clinical situation that we need to be aware of that people bring to the workplace, where does it come from, and what within the workplace, if anything, could exacerbate it or cause it to happen? Because I think that we need to understand this, especially since everybody, I want to add this other piece so you can decide where you want to go with it. We in the field of data, we say, well, we just need to make objective decisions. So emotions are important, and they kind of are. So,
well, the problem is that every decision that we make ultimately is going to be informed by emotional information anyway, whether we recognize it or not. So let me just continue. So that chain. So we have this, we were talking about an inability to identify feelings, which leads to an inability to describe feelings, which leads to this kind of externally oriented thinking style. But the consequence of that is that I lose certain key abilities that demand internal focus, like imagination, right? If I don't spend any time looking inwards, I don't spend any time looking inwards. So my ability to imagine and conceive things starts to sort of atrophy. It doesn't go away entirely, but it kind of gets less and less and less and less. And then where is that important? That isn't important anytime we need to set a goal, because goals are 100% imaginary. They do not exist ever. Right? A goal is a mental construct that when it becomes real, becomes a result. So the goal itself is wholly imaginary.
Right, but wouldn't it, I think it would also come in if I'm looking for insights in a data analysis, because
Absolutely.
right, because insight is not like, oh, this is what a chart says. Insight is my ability to tie together or connect the dots
Yeah.
of a whole bunch of different things. And if imagination or creativity is missing, if I'm hearing you correctly,
Yep.
then that's going to have a very significant impact on my ability to say anything more than, oh, here's what's on this sheet of paper.
Yeah,
Or in this
absolutely.
data. Am I tracking with you correctly?
You are tracking very well. That's all of those things. They're all connected, and the ability to do anything that is sort of internal, that kind of those kind of processing, means you have to have a relationship inside. So, if I don't spend any time thinking about what's going on inside of me because of I'm not interested in the emotions, well, guess what? It's all kind of one package. You can't pick and choose the things that you will turn on and experience and turn off. It's you either can do it or you can't.
So imagination's impacted, creativity's impacted.
Mm-hmm.
What else would be impacted? That would be things that I might want to use as my own skill sets.
Oh my goodness, anything. The ability to sort of to make connections, the ability to visualize, right? I mean, like a huge chunk of big data analysis is being able to visualize. Well, you have to kind of see that in your mind first before you can actually develop an algorithm that says, here's what we're going to do to put this out in a way that'll be interpretable by humans. I mean, we see this all the time. You get these crazy visualizations getting produced that people cannot read. They don't have any way to sort of interpret them. And it's like, here, look what I made. And it's like, put it on the fridge. Tell me about your drawing, right? Like,
right. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Well, and that's really a challenge for us. So go back for a second. What does cause this? Like, what do we need to be aware of in our lives or in our work situations?
So there's two main ways to look at alexithymia. There's primary, and primary alexithymia is tough. Okay, so it tends to emerge during childhood, and this is when a child is sort of new. He or she is going to feel things, right? There's going to be these emotional experiences. And if they are taught, you know what, yes, these emotional experiences are good and they're valid, and this is what those mean. That sensation is anger. That sensation is fear. That sensation is happiness. And that's okay to have those feelings. Then they will grow and be able to healthily compartmentalize all of those emotions as they grow. If they're told, no, those feelings that you have, you shouldn't be feeling them, or they're wrong to feel, or it's dangerous to feel them, then you're going to adopt sort of an approach of suppression. And as you grow, here's where things get really gnarly for people with primary alexithymia, is that I've learned over the years, you know what, I never really needed to understand my feelings. I never needed to do that. And look where I am now. I'm fine. The problem is primary alexithymia has fundamental connections to disorders like substance abuse, eating disorders, even psychosomatic illnesses like eczema and stomach ulcers.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really pernicious. Like it gets into all kinds of stuff. So your ability to interact with other people is impaired. Like it just impairs a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so that's one, and that affects probably 8 to 10% of the population. And
men and women the same?
Men and women, yeah, men and women are essentially the same. There are differences in presentation, but from a statistical perspective, you might see a little bit more. I think, if I remember correctly, there's a little heavier weight on the men's side, mainly for sociological reasons, right? Like, boys don't cry, all that stuff.
Right.
However, alexithymia doesn't have to be limited and restricted to childhood, right? So that's one case. The cases that happen a lot more frequently are secondary alexithymia. And this has to do with, I grew up normally, I'm more or less well-adjusted, and I've gone out to get a job, and I'm working in my job, and it's starting to get more and more stressful. There are greater demands being placed on me. I don't always understand what I'm supposed to do. There, how it is in these multi-project environments that we have these days, it's just pulled in all kinds of different directions. And this becomes overwhelming. And because of this, I start feeling things that are kind of unpleasant. Maybe I feel anger a little too much. Maybe I start feeling a little too burned out. Maybe I start recognizing, maybe I go through a series of disappointments. And those disappointments, I start associating with the hope that came before them. So, oh, I'm looking forward to something happening. I hope it's going to be fine. And then it turns out to be a train wreck. So I attach this positive emotion with this disappointment that comes later. So what do? You know what? I'm just going to check out and shut all of this stuff down because I don't want to be feeling it anymore. And that kind of happens to all of us at some point in our lives. But when it becomes really habitual, then other things start to happen. Remember, it's kind of like a pendulum. So I look inside myself. I make decisions based on the things that I find there. I can imagine things. I have reasonable levels of insight. I have psychological mindedness. And then I use that to inform my interactions with the world outside of me. When I shut this internal relationship down, all of those things kind of atrophy. They don't go away, but they get weaker and weaker and weaker. Now, we mentioned before, emotions are somatic. So it's not just things like happiness and sadness.
Right.
What about certainty? Right? Okay. Normally, I am guided by a set of convictions. And how do I know that something is right? I know something is right because I get a shot of dopamine.
Right.
I'm sitting there, la, 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 la.
Right.
I'm putting something together. Eureka! And bam, I get this dopamine that floods my body and says, I know I'm right.
Right.
Well, I've just shut that whole system down. So now I don't want to feel anymore. Well, you can't pick and choose, right? So if I've shut down my internal awareness, that dopamine may happen, but I don't recognize it. So do I know that I'm right? I don't know. I don't know that I'm right anymore. And now what happens, I may start to lose my way. Right? So there are long-term implications for this kind of habitual emotional suppression. Now, the nice thing is it's treatable, right? Like primary alexithymia is one thing, but if this happens later in life and you can recognize it, you can walk it back.
Okay, so before we get into like how we walk it back, I want to see if our audience actually has any questions. It may take them about 30 seconds or so to comment or ask us questions. So feel free to let us know if we're on track with you in terms of what is being said here and what you'd like Jeff to dive in a little bit more other than the questions that I've been asking myself along the way. So I want us to imagine just for a second that we work in a workplace where it's not exactly acceptable to show emotions, because that to me is a pretty common in the workplaces that I've been in. And if I'm not allowed to do that, and you're saying that it could eventually have an impact on certainty, and now I've got a whole group of people who are meeting to discuss the need to make a decision based on information that's been brought to them, data, problems, whatever. What can I assume that potentially that my whole group won't be able, they'll be paralyzed at some point?
No.
Okay.
So want to not conflate emotional awareness with emotional presentation.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I mean, I might be feeling really scared and really freaked out, but if remember we said that it's not about giving free rein to feelings. We don't want to like if I'm a leader and I walk in front of a room and I go, oh my God, I'm so freaking out right now. Like that's not going to inspire a lot of confidence.
Right.
But that doesn't change the fact that I am very much aware that I am scared. Right. So I can feel something. I can know what I'm feeling, and I can express that in a way that is not going to completely alienate me from the people around me. Now, when it comes to working in a workplace where emotional presentation is something that we want to kind of maybe like minimize, we can still talk about it. We can say very reasonably, you know what, I'm a little worried that if we proceed down that particular course of action, that there are going to be consequences for us. And that's something, well, let's talk about those consequences. And we're all, we all have our big boy pants on, or big girl pants on too. And we can all make, effective decisions about that, but we're not denying the information, the emotional information that lies behind that.
But we'd have to have that conversation, right? That would have to be, if I'm hearing you correctly, would have to be allowable.
Yes. And the thing is, whether leadership acknowledges it or not, Emotions underlie every single human
I know.
endeavor that has ever
I
existed
know.
since the dawn of time,
I
right?
know.
What is every project objective fundamentally based on? I want, I need, I fear. That's it. There is no other reason to do anything. What we do, though, is we build up with all kinds of rationale and cognitive type of structures to bury that emotional information that lies underneath. But that's the whole point.
Right. Right, right. So when I talk about the process for making decisions with people, to me, it has to be front and center. We can't continue to put it underneath, because what it does is it adds a lot of complexity
Yeah.
to the situation, and it adds a lot of superfluous data. It's like when I teach people how to ask good questions before they do a data analytics exercise, and I say to someone, ask a leader, do you believe you already know the decision? Yes or no?
Mhm.
It's asking for an emotional reaction. It's not just the answer, but I'm asking for the emotional reaction. And people are like, yeah, but isn't that like if you follow what they say and you do nothing because they're certain that that it's going to go this way and it doesn't matter what you're going to say, aren't you adding bias to the situation? Is what people will tell me. And I'm like, it's going to happen anyways. Why am
Exactly.
right? Right, but that's the leveling that you're talking about. It's still here underneath, and I think that's our message for today. Is
Yeah.
that emotional intelligence, and you'll have to give me the exact words again in your definition, but emotional intelligence not only underlies everything, it really is the genesis for emotional intelligence. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to put that.
Yeah. So somebody has said, Lindsay has asked a comment here. She said, fascinating stuff, Jeff. I'm assuming there's big cultural differences here too. Stiff upper lip and all that.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah. But go back. You said that the primary alexithymia is about 8 to 10% of the population. Now with the
Yep.
secondary, we take it up to what level?
It can go up to about 30, I think. I mean, we see in various
30%?
oh yeah, but we're talking about getting into really subclinical types of spaces. Alexithymia, the sort of the main alexithymia, sticks down to about 10% of the population
Okay.
who have a serious presentation of
Okay.
it. But secondary alexithymia exists on a scale, so it's really kind of impossible to tell how far into the population does it continue. I mean, emotional suppression is something that we are all guilty of at some point.
So
Where does it become a problem?
right. So then, to Lindsay's point, there would be a cultural impact.
For sure.
If there are particular cultures who say that's not the way we present. Like I'm Italian and Polish, but we act Italian in my family. So I mean, there's no suppression of emotion whatsoever. We know the more colorful you are, the more you'll get heard, right? But I also know though that that expression, if I were to go speak in another country, may not be acceptable behavior, right?
Sure. Sure. But we have to make the distinction between again, there's emotional expression. There's what I show on the surface, what I'm actually acknowledging is happening inside of my body.
Right.
Right. So I may know if I'm in a particular scenario with a particular group of people, again, going, oh my God, not going to help the situation at all. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm still feeling these things, and I need to be aware of what's going on.
Right. So alexithymia, though, is the inability to actually have to identify the feelings, to describe them as well. So actually, for those people, I would imagine it would be easier to be in the sorts of environments where it's not allowed, or that decisions are like. Would I find these people like saying like, "Well, why can't we be objective about a decision?" Would they be more apt?
No. So somebody with alexithymia, there are a lot of issues, especially interpersonal issues that arise. Because I don't really have a good handle on my feelings, what happens is they build up and they build up and they build up and they build up. And then at some point they demand expression. But I don't know a healthy way to express them, right? If I'm highly alexithymic, right, I'm going to have one volume. I'm going to have one word for anger, and it's angry, and probably it's more extreme than that. So what happens is I just yell a lot. I have these outbursts. I don't think. One of the things that happens with alexithymia it's not just sort of my inability to recognize my emotions. It's anything internal. So have you ever met somebody who leaves their coat on, leaves a winter coat on the inside of a building, where the heat's blasting, and it's like all of a sudden after a while they become completely irritable and no fun to be around, and they don't know why, right?
Okay.
That's what's going on, right? Like, I don't know what's going on inside of my own body. Some people, they can't recognize hunger, right? So the way our body works when we're hungry, so we digest our food, and it starts to move through our bloodstream. Well, the stomach empties out, and then it's like, well, dude, what's going on? The stomach, once it's empty, starts producing ghrelin, which is a hormone.
Right.
And ghrelin goes into the bloodstream, and it starts building up and building up and building up, and that sends a signal to the midbrain that says, I need to eat. I better get something now, or I'm going to be in trouble. This is a survival thing, and survival stuff tends to involve, like, not very nice emotions, right? Like, blah. So somebody with alexithymia will still have that very thing happen. The ghrelin still goes out into the bloodstream. It still starts to build up. But because they have no real sense of what's going on in their body, right, they're not sensitive to the physiological cues, that ghrelin will build and build and build a lot longer, which means all of the negative emotions that are associated with survival, with being hungry, are going to be that much more pernicious. So there's going to be a great big blowout, like, blah, I'm starving. And it's past hungry. Now it's like just yelling at people and being mean and hangry and awful, right? They're much more likely to get to that point because they have no sense of what's going on inside. This is going to apply to anything like that, including things where we're in a group discussion and things aren't going my way, but I don't want to say anything. And I'm just going to just let it ride, let it ride, let it ride, let it ride until boom, right? Alexithymia is not conducive to healthy civil discourse, especially where problem solving is concerned.
So, well, sometimes, it's interesting because I think in the workplace, people describe that as somebody who's Jekyll and Hyde, or who appears to be, they use terms very loosely, or appears to be schizophrenic, and it's not schizophrenic. There's something else that's going on, or they appear to be unpredictable, or we're going to see the outburst happen. And so, I think the challenge that you're raising for us is that if the stress of the workplace can take an individual from not exhibiting these behaviors to exhibiting them, that's a problematic thing.
Very much so.
Right? Now, I'm curious. I'm thinking, because I've used some of these tools, that current emotional intelligence instruments don't ever look at these sorts of things, do they? Is that a fair statement on my part?
I think you're identifying a couple of things about most common emotional intelligence assessments. The original tools that came out sort of in the 90s, they were designed to be kind of ability based, and what that means is that they're sort of scored as if they're right or wrong. So I show you a picture and you say that's happy, and then yay, you win a point. And it's like, that's not really how that works, right? Like, so there's a lot of measurement challenges around it. Now, what we've come up with since are measures of something we call trait emotional intelligence, which is more on a continuum, and we get that. But the models themselves tend to mix stuff all up in a way that's kind of like gumbo. So I know what anger feels like in my body. I know what sadness feels like in my body. But I don't know what it feels like in your body. I can't possibly know that because I don't live in your body. But I can infer. So I have one set of skills that I will use to be able to sort of know what's going on here. But then there will be a completely different set of skills that I will have to invoke to be able to understand what's going on with you.
Right.
Right. Now, some models recognize that, and they do make the distinction. Other models, they don't. They just kind of lump them all in together. It's like, oh, I know my feelings. I know your feelings. We all know each other's feelings. And it's like, you're not really catching it there, Charlie, right? Like, so what we've done is we've made a real point in terms of our instrumentation to be able to segregate these things. So we know sort of things that are purely emotional, and we pull those competencies out and try and measure them individually. We also do the same thing with social competencies, but the challenge, of course, is social competencies are really, really hard to manage or to measure. Back actually January of this year marks the 100th anniversary of a construct called social intelligence. It first came out in January 1920 of Harper's Magazine.
Wow.
And the idea of, it's cool.
Very cool.
It's been around for a very long time, but it was probably one of the most difficult things to measure. So it never really made it into the mainstream. And one of the reasons is, so the original paper from like 100 years ago basically said there are some people who are really good at school, they can get really great grades, and they're strong in that. And then there are other people who are really good at making friends, and they're social and everybody loves them, and they're really good at that. And these are mutually exclusive abilities, right? So it is potential for me I could do really good in school and nobody likes me, and I could be super friendly but dumb as a rock, right? Like all combinations of these two things are possible. So people set to measure it, and what they said was, well, let's start thinking of all of the different things that make up the social intelligence. And people would say, okay, if you want people to like you, you shouldn't pick your nose at the dinner table, right? That's something you shouldn't do. But the thing is, what is that ability? That is cognitive.
Right.
It's a rule that I have learned, don't do this.
Right.
Right. But then I can also sit with you over coffee and not say a single word and have you just feel warmly towards me. Right. That's something we all can kind of do to certain degrees. But that's not cognitive. That's something completely different. So for the next, I'd say 70 years, people tried to get a handle on this and measure them. Where we came to, so we said, let's not try to measure the individual things that we do, but the results from a pathological perspective when things go badly. So we look at things like social integration, how able you are to maintain groups of friends and have people around you, how able you are to subject yourself to evaluation, right? So can you go onto a stage and perform well, or is that going to be a problem? And how effective are you at making your own decisions in social situations, right? So if you go to a party, can you say, yeah, you know what, I'm totally going to be fine? Or do you say, I can't make a decision. I can't do anything.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's really cool because I applaud you, first of all, for taking such a difficult concept, because we know in the psychological arena, it's very difficult to try to really hone in on what are the roots of something. I do have a couple of questions for you. So I don't know if these will relate to what we've talked about already, or will get us on something new, but let me read them both to you. So Lindsay said, how can we help or interact with people who appear to be struggling? There's potentially so much going on with them in their head and in their body, where to start, what to do. So that's one question. And then the second one from Joanna is, I spend time with people to get to know them a little bit more. This helps to identify such moments, but not easy, at least for me. Does it help?
So those are two very good questions. I want to tackle which one to tackle first? Let's tackle Lindsay's question.
Okay.
So the question of how you can, we all know people who are struggling, right? We know what it looks like when people struggle. Now, what often happens is that we either just leave them to their own devices and let things sort of like take their own course, or maybe they'll figure it out. In today's world, with the pressures that are on most of us to be able to perform with so many conflicting and often unmanageable demands, I think making an observation that somebody seems to be having a hard time is a good clue to approach them and say, dude, do you want to go for a coffee? Do you want to go for a beer? Do you want to hang out? Just talk to me. Right? Like, be the one to sort of take the onus and say, let's just take a break and talk. You may find that people are really struggling and really overwhelmed. And one of the things that we're all kind of bad at is setting boundaries. So finding ways to help sort of identifying where the boundaries need to be, and then helping them find ways to set those up. I know one of the things that used to happen to me when I was working, I would get stuff thrown at me all the time. And I used to think, when I was early in my career, I used to think that, well, I just have to do everything because people are saying, because I have to, right? That's my job. And what I learned after a while was, you know what, I would watch people who would be in similar situations and they'd be tearing their hair out and then they just have enough and then they would quit. And somebody else would come in and immediately a team of 5 is installed where that one person had been, right? And it's so hard to watch that. But then you realize, well, the person who came in, who was arrowed for that position said, sure, I can do this, but I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this. And then you can have everything that you want, right?
Right.
So identifying what the stakeholder in that particular situation is going to need and say, here's what it will take to get you those things, right? That's a very reasonable way to sort of immediately sort of manage what's going on for you. But when we're in those situations, we tend to take it so personally and say, I can't, I just have to do it. I just have to do it. So for Lindsay, if you observe someone who seems to be struggling, this is a worthwhile conversation to have over a beer and maybe help them identify what boundaries do you think we could put in place that might make your life a little bit easier.
Right. Well, and I also think that the whole issue for me around how do you help people center and ground, I talk about it as the hurricane, but in the eye of the hurricane, there's complete peace and calm.
It's very true.
Right. And so how do we get to that point and how do we help people with those conversations? So I actually have several more questions, but let's go back to Joanna's too.
Mm-hmm.
She says, I spend time getting to know people a little bit more. And this helps to identify such moments, which are these, I think, the moments that Lindsay was talking about, but it's not easy. So I'm assuming that what you're saying is that, yes, and you still need to do it, right? We still need, and I'm hearing you correctly. I'm not listening to solution. I'm listening to listen.
Yes. Right? Solutioning is terrible. Solutioning is so destructive.
Terrible with that situation. So I think it's just about the ability to listen, sometimes reflect back, sometimes be that place of calmness for them, that then allows them. People are smart, right? And they fail because we give them solutions. I think that's one of the answers to our questions. But allowing them to discover for themselves that which they already know.
Yep.
And if they don't, then we can make some gentle suggestions. So Daniel Simon, I'm glad that he's joined us today. He said he apologized for coming in late and that you might have already discussed this. He said, can you please give the group your definition of emotional intelligence again?
Sure. So when I look at emotional intelligence, my kind of position about it is, am I able to identify emotional information that's happening within me or within somebody else and use that information to make effective decisions? That's, for me, everything that it boils down to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that again. Joanna asked another question. She said, talking to them, arising trust between two people, and it may help to generate this social intelligence. Is that right? And that trust is the key in her opinion.
Trust is incredibly important. Absolutely.
Yeah, to that. Well, and to the 3 different pieces of social intelligence that I think you were describing for us earlier based on the work that you're doing at the university. And then Lindsay has an additional comment to us. She said, great insights about boundaries, and she thanked you for that. We're talking a lot about the PMO becoming more caring, being switched on to people struggling in the delivery organization, knowing how to respond to that. Well, that the PMO is working that out, and the boundaries you mentioned is a good one to understand more about. And so I think that's just making a commentary, right, on all of this. It's not just an individual sort of thing, but it's, what we haven't talked about is what's the role of a leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right, in all of this, because I'm hearing you say some things that are really critical to leadership skills. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can elaborate on that as people are asking more of their questions. But by the way, Daniel did say that your definition is more definitive and more than what he gets from other people. So I think that's great. And I think it's so clear, Jeff. It's relatable, not just in our personal lives, but in our work lives. But talk a little bit about leadership, and then I'll see if people have other questions for us.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Joanna. So, from a leadership perspective, I mean, every one of the things that we measure in our instrumentation can be applied from a management, a leadership perspective. So, we look at 3 things that are sort of beyond the initial emotional assessment. There is emotional understanding, so the ability to identify and recognize your own feelings. There is psychological mindedness, which is the ability to think about those feelings and make interpretations based on the emotional information that you've received. Attentiveness, which has to do with sort of focus on not just on activities, but also on, conversations with other people. And emotional communication, which is the ability to clearly tell people and can convey emotional information from within yourself, right? But also, I can interact with you and I know, okay, you're feeling this. I'm going to surmise you're feeling this, and I know what that feels like within myself. Mm-hmm. We combine those with the social competencies that we mentioned earlier, but the other piece that has historically been dropped is motivation.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, historically. So you have to remember, this whole branch of psychology, this whole branch of study started with that early Thorndike paper from 1920, right? But if we go back even further, way back to the time of Plato, he identified that the human soul was composed of three different things, and he had different names for them, but there was essentially cognition, emotion, and will. And will is this funky thing, right? There's a researcher named Snow from the 90s who took this concept of willpower and broke it down into two things. There is the non-cognitive piece that sort of we all have to go through. I have to make up my mind that I want to do something.
Right.
Motivation is the process that gets me to that decision, and it's entirely internal. But then there is volition, which has to do with, okay, I've made up my mind. I know what I'm going to do. Now, get it done. I'm going to, from a behavioral perspective, take charge and finish what I started. So these are the other two components that we consider essential in terms of not just from a personal competency perspective, but also from a leadership perspective, being able to wrap those three things together. So we have emotional competencies, social competencies, and motivational competencies that make up the sort of non-cognitive canvas that all of us kind of have, the competencies we all have to use to sort of live our lives.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, the work that you and your colleagues have been doing is far more, I don't know a better word, thorough. I mean, right? I mean, it really addresses a number of different aspects that over the years have either been forgotten or neglected or haven't been. I mean, what you guys have done a brilliant job of doing is tying them together.
We like to think so. But
it's two pieces. One is to distinguish between them, but the other piece is to connect the dots and do the alignment between them. Because as you said, when you started out our conversation today, we're whole. We don't just have the piece up here, the brain, and then the rest of the body. We come as this whole entity. But where what's challenging in the psychological arena is teasing apart the pieces in order to recreate the whole.
Yeah, and it's essential to do it in a way that you can measure and distinguish these things. The other thing that happens in a lot of modern measurements is measures of affect. So measures of actual emotion. It's one thing for me to say, I recognize emotions and I have competencies that allow me to deal with emotions and express emotions. There is also the idea of emotionality itself, and those are not the same thing. So we could say, yes, I'm generally positive, or no, I'm generally kind of irritable or anxious or neurotic, right? But those are not the competencies, right? Most measures out there have some kind of lump that kind of stuff in. You'll see items like, I'm generally irritable, or I get freaked out easily. They don't say freaked out, but I get easily upset. And it's like, no, you know what? That needs to be out of there, because you can't measure competency if you're confusing it with, these trait-like tendencies.
That's fascinating. So, take me to a different place then of implication, because I'm on LinkedIn probably a couple hours a day. I don't know if that's good or not, but I love engaging in conversations and meeting new people, and really trying to get a feel for the pulse of where things are worldwide. Because both for you and I, our work is worldwide. It takes us to lots of different and unique places with people. What are the implications then to me as I listen to all of this today with you, and we have about 10 minutes left in our show? It's kind of like the so what? Like I see conversations, from a group of data people saying, oh, what are the soft skills that we need to teach people? Oh, it's empathy, and oh, it's this, and oh, it's that. But what you've said is, whoa, folks, time out. This is like Really, there's lots of details behind this. Can I even teach it? I mean, can I run courses on this in the
Of course.
workplace? And are the typical courses going to be enough? I mean, I think about this, as someone who's done training and still continue to do training in these areas. It sounds to me like we need to get far more explicit about different aspects. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah. So all of these things, when we look at these competencies we've talked about, these emotional, social, motivational competencies, they have different, they appear in different ways depending on the work that we do. Right? Remember, I mentioned it a bit a while ago about, a funeral director doesn't necessarily need a sense of humor.
Right.
Or maybe they do, but they have to be very careful in terms of how they express it. A salesman, on the other hand, probably does need a sense of humor, which means if you were to measure the sense of humorness of these two people, the salesperson, simply by virtue of the fact that they do this all the time, is going to have a more developed ability to tell jokes.
Right.
How we apply the competencies that we need to do our jobs is going to depend on the nature of the job that we do. But every one of those things can be taught. These are competencies, they are not traits. So, for example, I am a dyed-in-the-wool introvert. I am 100% introverted, and people never believe that because it's like, Jeff, you come out, you talk on stage, you get all animated, you get excited. That is learned behavior, right? I learned to do that because my job demanded that I do that. I'm in front of people all the time, right? I have to be able to do that. But I will leave a classroom full of people who are just, all kinds of engagement. I will go home and I'll be exhausted. Right.
I would not be. I'd be like, yay, where can we go out?
Right. So it's important to remember that learned behavior, that all these competencies can be acquired if there is the desire to do so. Right. Now we come into data professions, we come into project professions, and the assumption is, well, what I need to worry about is the cognitive. I need to demonstrate that I'm smart, that I'm capable, that I have abilities. But unfortunately for all of us, and we usually discover this within short order, we have to work with other people, right? And as soon as we're thrust into a position where, social competencies all of a sudden become important, then it's kind of like, well, what do I do now? And I know what that's like, right? I think you do too.
Yes, I do. Well, and I think what happens though sometimes is then we say, well, our job doesn't necessarily demand it. If I don't have it, my job doesn't demand it. And we as a group don't need to do it. And then we isolate. People keep saying, well, we need to get the data folks or the project folks aligned with the business, right? These are ongoing, like probably for the next millennia together. But these may actually be, if I'm hearing you correctly, artifacts. Right? Artifacts of what we bring to the situation and not exercising the muscles that you're telling us to exercise.
And that's exactly it. One of the things, if we are a data scientist, we are really become very good at data science because that's the thing that we spend our time practicing. We don't become very good at human interaction and telling jokes and being fun and friendly because that's not something we spend our time doing. But here's the thing, in a multidisciplinary or a multi-project environment, the IT folks definitely need to understand the business rules, right? They definitely need to understand how things work across the enterprise. And if they can't do that, then they're not going to be able to effectively solve problems. But how are you going to understand rules that are outside of your domain if you don't have the ability to interact with other people and solicit those important cues that lie behind them? A business rule doesn't exist for no reason.
Well, but it's even in the decision process, there really is no decision in an organization unless you're maybe sitting at the top of the organization. But, I worked with a lot of CEOs, and this isn't always the case either, where it is multidisciplinary. It's meant to be collaborative. And, we talk about, there's a new article out in research on collaborative blind spots, but they're related to all of the things that you're talking about today. They're not different from them. And so what you're saying is, we focus so much on giving people the cognitive skills. We've got to start to really think about these other aspects so that these cognitive skills can actually work more effectively. It's not doing more and more of this. But before you answer that or react to it, we have about 5 minutes left. So for those of you who are listening, you're on about a 30-second leg with us on LinkedIn. If you have additional questions before Jeff leaves us in the next 5 minutes, let us know, because we would love to know what you have to share with us today. So please feel free to give us feedback on the program, questions you may have, comments. And as I said earlier, just got a slew of articles on LinkedIn that I would love for you to take a look at. And I've also challenged him. I want him to write about these myths of emotional intelligence, like one paper at a time. That's the challenge before we got started today. But kind of as we're waiting, actually, there is a comment that just came in. So let me go to it. Joanna says, I wonder why companies have a clear idea that execution and coordination meetings are a must, but emotion sharing meetings are not. Does this question make sense?
Okay, so let me... I want to get to, I'm trying to understand the question part there. So what I'm hearing is that, what I'm hearing is we like to talk about coordination. We like to talk about knowledge and facts and things and all that stuff, but we don't want to talk about, sorry?
And getting things done.
And getting things done. Right? Yeah, we want to talk about results and all that stuff, but we don't want to talk about feelings. And then we stop and think about what's really kind of going on there. What we're saying is, yeah, we want to talk about all the good stuff and the things that are hard, the things that are difficult, the things that are potentially barriers to actually getting those things done, we would rather ignore because they're really inconvenient, right? And that's kind of, modern business in a nutshell. Right?
Well, yeah, and I think though, I'm not certain, based upon what you've said earlier, if it's about an either or world. Execution, coordination meetings, emotion sharing meetings. I think it's a both and, right? It really is about the ability in these other meetings, these execution coordination meetings, to allow room for conversations. Yeah. About what's going on, the recognition, the ability to reflect, to ponder, and we don't allow space nor time for that. So a really good, I think, meeting facilitator or leader of a meeting is about, again, they would have to be able to have the ability to do this. And if they had alexithymia, this would be difficult. Watch people's faces.
Yeah.
Watch when the arms move to the stomach. As a former therapist, I've had years of training on this stuff. It's noticing those tiny little nuances so that I can say, Jeff, I just noticed that, something changed in your face. I don't know what it is. What's going on for you, right? Mm-hmm. And allowing that to come out, and then being able to help the group in a healthy manner. Mm-hmm. To address that. Am I correct in making?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that you're just talking about basic sensitivity, right? Paying attention to what's actually going on with others. And remember, everything that we do, everything has an emotional underlying its objective, always.
Right. So well, and I think a couple more comments on that. It says, I think people are scared to this is from Lindsay. I think people are scared to let emotion out in meetings like that. It might make me look weak. Mm-hmm. And Daniel says, another one of the topics we avoid in those meetings is risk. Mm-hmm.
Are they not tied? Are they not fundamentally tied together?
Yes,
right?
I know.
Those two things.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, you want to talk about emotions. Let's just bring risk to the table, right? But again, as you're saying, emotional intelligence is, and emotions are fundamental to our ability to make decisions. Yeah. And also, if I'm hearing you correctly, our ability to follow through on them. Because given the motivation piece you talked about, it's not just the getting to the emotion piece, which you all in your work measure, but it's the ability to follow through, which is just as critical, right? So if people want it, I'm curious, is the tool that you're talking about, the assessment, available for people to use?
Interestingly enough, we actually just had a breakthrough this morning. So we've had the tool available for some time, but it's required human intervention to actually generate the reports. We just now managed to get it done, so it's end-to-end automated. So you sign up to take the assessment, and all the way through to you automatically get a feedback report sent back to you.
No, so an individual can do that now?
Yep.
And
Well, we have to actually finish the coding, but yes,
okay.
very,
Well, what I'm
very
going to
soon.
do is when I post this show right away up on LinkedIn and then also on YouTube. But when you get that done, that link done, let's add it to the YouTube
Will do.
page so that people can learn how to access it, and they can always find you through LinkedIn or your company as well, Adaptimist Insights. And is there then a way? So I'm assuming then groups could do it too. A group, like an instructor, could come and have their whole group do something and then get the results back.
Yeah,
Or
what we're actually hoping to do is we want to start working with coaches. So people who have multiple clients of their own, we provide the tool for them, and we also provide them sort of some coaching guidance. So here's what these dimensions mean. Here's how to ask questions that probe them. Here's how to sort of guide people through to find their own solutions in terms of improving things. We want to have sort of that whole end-to-end kind of thing. That's what we've been working on the last year.
that's really cool. So if someone who is an executive coach or is working on personal development for someone would have that also from you. And then I'm assuming that over time that will morph into what are you doing? Like, what could someone do in a group situation? Because I'm like,
Yeah, and we're also focusing on different specific professions. So we have this stuff for project managers, and it means that we can compare your scores as a PM to other PMs, so you know where you stand against your peers in terms of all of these competencies. We also have it for first responders now. We've got it for teachers. We've got it for a different group. So we're trying to build that suite out.
could you do it for data people?
Yeah, actually, given where I'm at right now in terms of the folks that I'm teaching, that's going to become something I think we'll be doing.
Yeah, I think it could be oh my gosh, invaluable. I'll be like on your doorstep. I'll fly to Toronto to talk to you about this. Seriously. No, I think it's really needed. And I think the ability to do those comparisons would be interesting for people. Some really interesting insights will come from that. So just a couple last comments as we wrap up. Daniel just said in a comment back to Lindsay, no one wants to say I don't know or how we are going to accomplish this. And then Lindsay said, great show, guys. I need to eat now. Totally listening to my body. I think that's a perfect way for us to end today. Jeff, I am so blessed that I had the opportunity to meet you a couple years ago in London and to share the main stage with you. I look forward to seeing more of your work, more of your articles, and I encourage everyone who's listening to this to connect to Jeff and to take a look at his work, which is on LinkedIn. It's absolutely astounding. And thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Lori.
Okay, take care.